Hello and welcome to week 7 of Organization, Leadership, and Decision Making. My name is Dr. Alan Dennis. I am your instructor. Our agenda for this conversation is similar to every week's. We will start with a discussion of assignments, and then we'll move on to a discussion of the reading associated with this week. First, the assignments. This week's we're covering information around ethics and leadership. So hopefully by the end of the week, you should be able to articulate what ethical leadership is and how it impacts organizational culture. You'll also be able to analyze the various dimensions of ethical leadership. Your reading this week is chapter 5 out of the text. Week 7's discussion centers on discuss and identify leader traits and attributes that are most beneficial in implementing the best decisions in an organization. Explain the differences in charismatic and transformational leadership and how both leadership styles impact the organizational effectiveness. Please note how these leadership styles affect implementing new innovative technologies. Review table 8.1 in the text. Note the work characteristics and traditional versus high performance focus. Note which focus is best for strategic decisions and which is best for operational decisions. As always, ensure that you do so in an APA format as much as possible inside of the constraints of the discussion board. Do make sure that you respond to two of your classmates' posts in a unique way, adding to the conversation in one of the ways that's outlined on the slide. A little bit of foreshadowing to next week, week 8. By the end of week 8, you will be able to discuss knowledge sharing. So the goal of that week is to discuss knowledge sharing. And by the end of the week, you should be able to characterize how trustworthy and ethical leaders enhance knowledge sharing in organizations. The reading for this week, or week 8, are the 2 articles that are listed inside of the folder. Week 8's written assignment is related to the 2 journal articles you're to read. They focus on transformational leadership and knowledge sharing within an organization. After you've reviewed those articles, respond to the prompts on the screen. How do trustworthy and ethical leaders enhance knowledge sharing in organizations? How does this impact the rate of information technology implementations, and how does this impact data management within the organizations? How does servant leadership assist with transferring knowledge in an organization? When thinking about data analytics, how does transformational leadership assist with building good data structures? As always, you'll respond to these prompts inside of an APA formatted document that is 3 to 5 pages in length, not including the title or references. Make sure that you use a minimum of 5 sources in your citation, and those need to be peer-reviewed scholarly sources. Generally speaking, those are journal articles. And make sure that you cite appropriately in that assignment. This is the rubric, which is consistent across this course for all of your written assignments. Ensure that you focus your energies on the excellent column at the far right. That's where you want to be. So if you haven't done so already, make sure that you are a master of APA so that you don't lose any points for APA style writing and so on. So, and as always, remember that APA is not just about the format. It is about much more than that. Is how you write, the tone you use, how you present information, and so on. This week, the reading we'll be discussing comes from the text. And again, we're still in part 1, chapter 5, ethics and leadership. So we're going to talk about ethics. The learning outcomes. After we've reviewed this material and you've read the chapter, you should be able to critically evaluate and comprehend the concept of ethical leadership theories and models. You should be able to examine and discuss recent issues in ethical and unethical leadership in the context of contemporary work organizations, and identify and critically analyze the social and ethical responsibilities of contemporary leaders in industry, and understand the role of ethics in the future of organizations and employment relations. First, we'll start with a discussion of ethical leadership. So what is ethical leadership, the nature of it? Every society has a set of rules that are typically not written down, but they are essentially things that are allowed and not allowed. We act in a certain way as a set of basically moral rules constraining what we do. Um, Generally speaking, they compel us to tell the truth rather than to lie to family members, friends, and colleagues, and so on. There's a set of behaviors that are kind of expected, and there are usually some form of consequences to those behaviors, even if it's at a social contract level. So there are two schools of thoughts of having ethics, which is the notion of leaders. Basically, they're imbued with ethics, act as a driver of ethical conduct in the organization. And then there's managing ethics, which is ethical leadership's sole purpose is to provide conditions for organizational success. And generally speaking, in that sort of approach, an organization is more successful if it is ethical. So, philosophical approaches to ethical leaderships, and this is a philosophic sort of conversation. So, we're going to go into a little bit of philosophy here. Utilitarianism, consequentialism, and forward looking is that right or wrong of actions and behaviors are directly assessed against its consequences and whether those consequences prescribe to the basic consequentialist principles of the greatest good for the greatest number. Or another way to put this is the ends justify the means. So the outcome of a thing is what matters, not necessarily the thing itself. That is that school of thought. Um, a present-looking sort of approach is a little different. It is not the consequences of an action that make it ethical, but whether the act was simply the right thing to do. So was it the right thing? What came from that action ends up not necessarily mattering. As from an ethical perspective, was the act the correct thing to do? Another approach is the philosophical egoism, follows on the belief of reality through a social lens. People will follow if it avoids punishment. Social acceptability of behavior is paramount to achieving one's self-interest, thus leading to social approval to direct the moral path. So basically, this is implying that what you do because you don't want basically others to think poorly of you and you don't want to be punished for behaving inappropriately. Not necessarily that you're doing it because it's the right thing, not that you're doing it because you think the outcome of the thing will be the right thing, but because you want to be liked by others to some extent. Ethics of virtue. It is the system of beliefs that take precedence rather than behaviors. Virtues may be moral, courage, justice, and prejudice, or intellectual, wisdom. And then there's the ethics of responsibility. The key of understanding is that everyone is responsible for their own through an open set of possibilities. Moving on to leadership models. Um, the authentic leadership, transformational leadership, charismatic leadership, servant leadership. So of these, which perspectives most suited ethical leadership, right? So what's the best approach for ethical leadership? The clear definition would be ethical leadership is mostly about the moral components. So when we're thinking about ethical leadership, it's making sure that within one of these other types of leadership models that we're thinking about the moral elements of those models. So the dimensions of ethical leadership, the moral components are not solely about the personal attributes or characteristics of the leader, nor are they solely about providing the conditions of organizational success. It is important to be a good leader, where good is defined as both effective and ethical. One should be both morally good person, so you should be a good person, and a morally good manager, and where morality is based upon the principles of what is right and not necessarily what is considered to be legal. So generally speaking, they're doing the right thing is a subset of doing the legal thing, right? So there may be some things that are perfectly legal that aren't necessarily right. Um, So they identified some keywords like character and integrity, ethical awareness, people orientation, including altruism, motivating, empowering, accountable, or as dimensions of ethical leadership, illustrating that ethical leadership is seen as one or a set of behaviors, others including integrity, trustworthiness, honesty, and empathy in the mix. So basically, what you can tell by looking at that is that they did a qualitative study, and these are the dimensions that emerged after they did the analysis of the various types of things that they saw. Ethical leadership is essential to promoting trust, and in turn, trust is essential to promoting employee engagement, which is essential for organizational success. So that's a pretty powerful sort of thing, is that your employees need to trust you as you're leading them. And without them being engaged, your organization is not going to be all that successful. It's oftentimes very challenging to measure engagement, but it is something that the absence of can be clearly seen. Organizations behaving badly or failures in ethical leadership. Misbehavior in work organizations is everything that employees do or think that their superiors do not want them to do or think. It is difficult to untangle the many instances of organizational behavior and assign responsibility and culpability. Many of the organizations found to be guilty of transgressions continue to operate. So there's some concerning statements there here is that you basically have some organizations who are obviously not good. They do things that are unethical in nature, and yet they continue to operate. And kind of a bit of a definition of what employees might think the unethical behavior is in an organization. Many of the CEOs and board directors who were empowered with leadership were well rewarded and maintained their careers. In the murk of organizational behavior, it is not clear where responsibility lies and what the place of leadership is in any transgression. The only leadership style experienced by employees is that of an immediate supervisor or line manager. Does the behavior or styles of line managers reflect the behavior or styles of senior managers, executives, and CEO and board of directors? So the idea here is that what really matters within an organization is not just what the characteristic, the belief system of the senior management, but it's got to be the entire management structure, or else it's not going to be effective, because a typical employee only is impacted by their direct manager. There is rarely a penalty or responsibility for leadership, but there is a premium. So you don't normally get points taken off, if you will, for not being a good leader or an ethical leader. But if you're a good one, then it may do well. Misdemeanors may be supported by the state or by poorly drafted or porous laws. The complexity of organizations, especially transnational with many subsidiaries, offshore holding companies, and complex supply chain relationships, makes identification of responsibility and culpability more complex. And what this is speaking to is that you have organizations that are multinational. And suppose you have a really large organization that makes cellular telephones, and maybe they operate some of their construction in China, and perhaps they're paying people a substandard wage and having them work in undesirable conditions. So who's responsible for that, right? And it may be perfectly legal in that country, but is it ethical? In large organizations, a context and framework can be developed that not only supports leadership, but also supports ethical leadership to the extent that it is possible to consistently maintain high ethical standards within the organization, regardless of who is the appointed leader. So if you get the framework in place, sufficiently such that all the policies, procedures, standards, and rules and all that sort of things, rules of conduct are in place, it may not matter so much who the current CEO is what that's basically saying. Context, and we've got the rhetoric and reality. So organizational culture is an important thing. Senior leaders exhibit a visible commitment to ethical principles. A trickle-down effect occurs throughout the workplace. Where a leader behaves unethically, and attempts similar behaviors from others or accepts similar behaviors from others, unethical practice will become normalized through acceptance and in some cases rewarded. Um, CSR is argued by Williams that an outcome of ethical leadership rather than ethical leadership in its own right. So the outcome, again, is what matters. From human resource management perspective, widely held to believe antecedents to an organization's actual culture, not simply about compliance, but also about demonstrating values through responsible, self-managed conduct. Thus, focus of ethical leadership includes both the individual and the organization. It's staying silent, unethical leadership. Whistleblowing is a response to an organizational member to disclose what they view as a wrongdoing. Responsible fellowship is another word for that. So, um, if you see something that's wrong, do you have the requirement to be a whistleblower? Uh, Contend that followers are enablers. That is, they permit leaders to do good and bad things, but followers also have a responsibility to watch their leaders. A psychological contract that influences employer to remain loyal to the employer or to be viewed as a snitch or a grass, which is slang, I guess, for someone who informs, as is snitch. A violation of the employer-employee relationship. So basically, there's different points of thought on being a whistleblower, but to me, it comes from the fundamental basis of you as an individual have your set of ethics and you must be true to them. So if you're observing something that's unethical, you have to do something about it. You don't have a choice. That would also be true if you're a leader and you're leading people and you're observing things perhaps by your leadership that is unethical. Millennial leadership, digitization, and AI. Millennials face a workplace where digitization and increasing automation of jobs is possibly the only certainty. So the time has came and went where there was a decision of should an organization move to a digital sort of structure, and also to where automation of some fashion was not being utilized as much as possible. Featherstone claims that with increasing digitization and automation, trust is oxygen. So that basically is implying trust is very, very important. The Deloitte Millennial Study of 2018 identified that confidence in business ethics is at its lowest in 4 years, signaling that leadership is not only required but mandatory for the group that is not only the immediate future workforce or the immediate future workforce, but consumers of the products and services provided by others. So can AI assist in providing ethical leadership as it displaces roles and responsibilities in decision making within an organization? Very good questions, and probably it can with the appropriate application of AI. And there's an entire field of study around AI ethics. And with that, we've reached the end of our discussion of this chapter. As always, if you have any questions, do feel free to reach out to me. That is what I'm here for. Uh, Stay safe, and we'll be speaking again next week.